Hello everyone, welcome to Roman Just Codes. It is time to unlock peak performance. Hi, I am Roman and welcome to the final episode of Animations with Rive and Flutter, the series. We've definitely come a long way, mastering the art of Rive with Flutter. But now it's time to ensure that those stunning animations run flawlessly, even in the most demanding apps. Get ready to optimize for speed, efficiency, and an unparalleled user experience. In this grand finale, we will dive right into the world of Rive performance in Flutter. We will explore advanced techniques for loading and caching Rive files, optimizing animation instantiation, and fine-tuning rendering for maximum efficiency. Learn best practices for resource management and discover how to squeeze every ounce of power from your Rive animations. Get ready to unleash the true potential of Rive with Flutter. And if you end up liking this video, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you can get notified about more content on Flutter and Rive coming my way. Thank you so much for your support. Now, let's finish strong by creating animations that not only dazzle, but perform. Hello everyone, welcome to Roman Just Codes. If you've made it this far, just wanted to say kudos to you for having completed all the things that we've accomplished up to now. We were able to explore the Rive editor. We were able to create our own animations, our own little characters. We created buttons. We created artboards, nested artboards, enabled the ability to change text. You saw how we were able to create those composite animations. So I'm pretty satisfied with how far we've come, all the things that we have created. It looks amazing. And now if you see the application already put together, I think it's looking pretty solid. So you see now our character being introduced on a landing page. Then we proceed next to create this mascot page where then you can select the options of multiple hats that you can wear. You can then trigger the character to jump, you can trigger your character to wave, you can change the name of your character if you want to. So a lot of great things that we've accomplished so far, so kudos to all of you who have made it this far. Now to wrap it up and just put a bow on it, now we're going to be discussing a couple of tips and tricks of the trade, a couple of things that you could do to improve the performance of your application. Right now, this is a very simple application. The file has a very low memory footprint. It has a very low size. For example, right now, you can even see that the file has like 68 kilobytes up to now. If you, for example, take a look at the file, it sits at 68 kilobytes. I don't think even one single SVG that you could have created before would have had that. Look at this one, for example. This one has 1 kilobyte, is just one, but then the whole application has 68 kilobytes, and that was just one single icon. I imagine like if you export some of those, they may blow up a little as far as like size. But I think I like the fact that we've brought it this far. And in the event that you truly create massive Rive files, and you create tons of animations, you want to be more cautious when it comes to how you load the files, how you create your widgets based on those files, how you distribute the animations, how you compartmentalize your animated assets. So this video will be based on that. That way you can bring it even much further as far as like how it performs. If you see the animation, it looks pretty smooth. If you reload it one more time, you don't see any lagging, you don't see any jank, you don't see any like hiccups or anything. It looks really smooth, very responsive. You don't see like, oh, like an issue of the character loading or performing the way that it is expected. But what if you do? What if you see some of those issues? What if you have a humongous file, you want to distribute it? Those are the things that we're going to be covering in this video. If we refer back to our design, we have in one single file, we have every single element that we're going to interact with in this application. This is totally fine. In this video, I'm going to show you also how you could maybe split this file into more discrete elements, related elements. For example, you can create one just for the buttons, one Rive file just for the character, one for the miscellaneous aspects. That could also even optimize how you consume some of these animations in your Flutter applications, because sometimes you may not need one specific component or one specific animation and you're loading everything at once, and then you're penalizing your users by loading the whole file at once when they're not even going to touch or tap into certain elements that you've created in here, and then you provide a very poor experience. Luckily, Rive performs really well, even with big files, but still you want to push the limits of how well you want to create an application to create that great experience, that amazing user experience for the users of your application. And then you create really smooth animations, a smooth experience, and they delight themselves by using your application. So why don't we do that? I'm going to show you a couple of those tricks, even also how you create widgets in a better way. We've already gone through a couple of ways that I create the widgets, but I'm going to show you even ways in which you can streamline that process. So let's start with that. So let's go back to our code. And if you saw here so far, we've created inside of the lib folder, I created a folder called widgets, and then there all our widgets are in there. You also saw the way that I created enums with some names, and then these names actually map to artboards and state machines in my Rive file. So this is one of the recommendations. The way that I did it right here is something that you could accomplish if, for example, your file is not a complex file, you only have certain animations, the animations don't have inputs, you don't need to be querying the state machine for text or something like that. If your animations are pretty straightforward, the way that I would recommend you do is create what I've seen also other people do is you create one single file that handles all your animation needs, loads the file only once, and then you use this approach of passing the enumeration value that corresponds to the state machine and artboard in question, the one that you want to display. So let me show you how you would do that. So let's say this is our file. Imagine it didn't have any inputs, any triggers to do. It's just a very straightforward file with a bunch of animations that you just want to display in your application that you want to consume within Flutter. Then once you have your animation, you could do around that widget, you could do anything you want. You can add gesture detectors. You can animate that same animation further within Flutter. So you could do a lot of things. So imagine I have all of these artboards right there. What you would do is something like this. So I'm going to move this over. And what I've seen people also do is, for example, they can create one single widget. I'm just going to go file and I'm going to call it mascot animations. I'm going to call it like that. Mascot animations.dart. You will of course create it as a stateful widget. And I'm going to call it mascot animations. You import your required dependencies. And here, of course, remember, you create one single instance of, let's just go through the motions as before. So you create a Rive animation and you create a state machine controller and you create a state machine controller as always. Of course, you go through the motions of overriding the init state. As always, you do this, you instantiate your animation, of course, using the, for example, if you want to pull it Rive animation.asset, if you want to do that, you know where the assets are. So you're going to go and pull your animation assets, animations, hello Rive.rive. You, of course, do the same thing as before. You would do this, let's say, if you want to make one single file for all your animations, then this, the fit, you might want to keep it as boxfit.contain. And I'll tell you why. Now, of course, you want to provide the onInit, and then you call it onRiveInit. As always, you consume the callback that lets your application know that Rive has been instantiated, that Rive has been loaded appropriately, that you're ready now to consume your animation. So you can just do the onRiveInit as always, consume your artboard, and then you do artboard like this. But remember what I mentioned. So you can create one single file that encapsulates all your animations and satisfies all your animation needs. You have one single file with 20 animations. They don't have any inputs. They don't have any listeners. They don't have any text. You don't have anything to be querying after that. Nothing to trigger. Just an animation that I just want to load on my application. Maybe icons or something like that. Multiple versions of it. You could do something like that. Then the way that you would do it, then you would come over here, create that enum, and then call it mascot animation items, whatever you want to call it. And here is when then you actually bring all the animations that are part of your Rive file, and then you just name them appropriately. You have the Rive artboard matching the state machine name, and then that way you could just know immediately and programmatically how to pull those artboards and their corresponding state machines. In this case, then I flip back to that mascot animations file that I created earlier, and I create a parameter called mascot animation items. You could call it anything, item. And then here you make it required. And then what you do now is you actually then load the corresponding artboard right here based on that enumeration value. So you do artboard, you use widget.item.name because you know that it matches exactly like the one that you have on your file. So then here under Rive and It, now you say controller, state machine controller from artboard. You pass, of course, the instantiated artboard by the Rive engine, by the Rive runtime. And then here you just go with the same widget.item.name. That way you satisfy one single file, one single widget that gives you all your animation needs. But check this out. I'm going to return an animation here once it has been instantiated, whichever one of these is, the cap, the birthday, the fun, the jump, wave, name. I could go with the other character one. It's called full body. I could go for the other ones. Remember, you have the mascot header. Either one of these. I'm going to go with a mascot header, mascot title. You could try that as well. You could come over here and say mascot title. I do mascot header. What is the difference between all of these animations? They all have different artboard sizes. First of all, Rive, because it's very optimized for performance in terms of how it renders the images, you can make it as large as you want and it will still display fine. You can make it really small. You won't have any degradation in graphics. It won't look pixelated because you're using vector graphics. So this is the great thing about Rive and those type of animations with optimized images and very performant images. You could just size it any way you want and it will scale appropriately and won't have any issues in rendering. So then what you do here, how do you satisfy the need that some of these are smaller, some of these are bigger and whatnot? If you want to use that one single file approach like I showed you, then what you would do is pass an additional parameter. You can pass a parameter type size. You could go final size and you could just call it size. And for example, by default, you can just say this.size and you can provide like a size, like a square size for now. And you can make it, for example, like 40 by 40. If you want to start with making them all small like that, actually square just takes one value. So there it is. And then you just make it perfectly square. Now you can use this same widget anywhere in your application. And all you need to do is provide the name of the corresponding animation that maps to a Rive artboard and state machine, and you're good to go. You don't have to create all of these widgets right here. You can save by creating most of these widgets right here, and then you should be good to go. If, for example, I try to do it right now and I come back to my, let's go to the landing page. I'm not going to do, of course, let's say the navigation. I'm going to comment on that. Let me reload the whole thing. And then here we are. If I just try to use this widget right here, as opposed to either one of these, I can just come over and add it on top, no animation. So I'm going to just come over here and I'm just going to say mascot animations, and I'm going to pass my mascot animation items. And let's go with the mascot header, for example. If I just try this, and then I reload it, you see it just works and just shows on top of everybody. Let me just comment this out just for a second. And then if I reload it, you see that I haven't applied the size yet, but you see that it just occupies just whatever space you give it within Flutter because of how flexible these images are. Because I just said box.contain to the fit of this widget, which applies to any of the artboards that are available in my Rive file. It could just even take the whole width of the screen. So it's pretty good. But now, because you're providing that default value here of the size, you can then constrain your widget to be any given size, and then you can use it for many use cases, for your icons, for your characters, for anything, whenever you can just pass the name of the animation and a size. So in this case, I'll just wrap this in a sized box and I'll just use the width. For example, I'll just do widget.size.width, and the height, I'll do the same, widget.size.height. If now I just reload it, you will see that it just shows right up there as a 40 by 40 square. But then no, I don't want that. I want to change it to something else. So what you do, you can wrap it inside a center, for example, and there it is. But you could also then change the size arbitrarily. You could just say size and then say size. I could do a 200 by 100. And then it will contain itself within these boundaries. And then now you will have it whichever way you want it. You can then go crazy in just loading all of your animations with one single file. All you need to do is provide the name of the corresponding artboard and state machine, and it will just load right away. Provide a size aside from different from the default one, and then you're good. You can make this the width of the screen if you want to again. For example, I can just come over here and say media query dot size of context, and then width. That's my width. And then I can do the same thing for the height. But remember, because it says contain, because I said contain, what it would do is it will retain its aspect ratio while still generating a bounding box for it, but it will just maintain the aspect ratio, grow as much as it can, whichever one of the boundaries, whichever one of the dimensions, whichever one of the coordinates it hits first. It hit first the width, so it stays at that width. If it had hit the height first, then it would have stayed at that one. If instead you would have changed this, instead of being contain was fill, check this out. It would have just filled the actual container, but it would distort the image. But at least this gives you an idea that Rive is actually really flexible. And in this particular case, it did not distort the SVGs themselves. It distorted the animation completely without compromising the internal workings of all those SVGs and all the animations that you created. Nothing got compromised. But at least you know that it got stretched, but as a whole, as a single unit. And you can make it fit any given container that you designate, that you give it a given specific dimensions, and then you should be good to go with something like this. So this is one of the approaches that I recommend if you want to optimize how you instantiate your Rive animations, how you minimize the amount of widgets that you need to create. And for example, you want to just streamline the way that you generate your animations, that you create your animations by just creating, let's say, one enumeration that contains all your animation names. You create that widget just like here. You provide it as a parameter, but you also provide a parameter to modify and to manipulate the dimensions of your containing of the bounding box of your Rive animation. So you could try this also if you want to save time, if you want to make it more streamlined, but this only applies for these particular cases where your animations are very basic. They don't have any inputs. You don't have to be searching for anything. Otherwise, the original approach of having a widget for each one of those is the preferred approach. So now let's proceed now, and instead of doing this, now let's try to see how you can cache, how you can preload your Rive animations, and you can save time in reinstantiating it or reloading it every single time that you create the widget that encapsulates your animation. You don't want to be reloading it all the time. You don't want to be fetching it from the assets every single time, reloading it every time, and then rendering it. You want to cache it in one particular location. You want to cache it up front, and then you want to reuse those bytes that have been loaded, and you can just load it directly without waiting for something to be loaded, waiting for a callback to notify you that the Rive animation has loaded successfully and your state machine is loaded, the file is already ready to be used and whatnot. And your state machine is loaded, the file is already ready to be used and whatnot. Let me show you how you can approach that. So another way that you can optimize the way that your Rive animations are loaded within Flutter is actually by caching. Under most circumstances, if you saw, for example, the size of the file right here, the hello Rive file is 68 kilobytes. It's pretty decent. But let's say in circumstances in which your animations are pretty heavy, you have like really complex files, you want to cache those files in memory, and then you want to reuse them throughout. But like I mentioned, you don't have to manage these files yourself. But if, let's say, your intention is to use the same Rive file in multiple parts of your application, or even on the same screen, kind of like in the way that we're doing it right now, then it may be advantageous to load the file once and then keep it in memory. And I'm going to show you exactly how you can approach that. Right now, if you look at all the widgets are actually loading the files from the assets by themselves. Every single widget is loading it again over and over and over, and then rendering it on the screen. There's got to be a way that you can optimize this. For now, again, you hardly notice any performance issues, any jank during its execution. Everything is really smooth. But in the event that you have really heavy animations, very complex animations, all of them running at the same time might affect the performance of your application. You may get into jank, you may get into sluggish animations, or an application that doesn't perform or doesn't provide a good user experience. So for that, then that's why Rive has the ability to cache those files in memory and then reuse them throughout. So why don't we proceed and build that out? So the way that you approach this, instead of having all of these animations being loaded separately, being reloaded from the assets every single time, what you do is you load it once. You see that all of them are actually reusing the hello rive.riv file. You load it once in memory, and then you refer to that file, to those bytes that have been loaded into memory. You just access it directly. There is a widget called Rive animation.direct that you should be able to leverage with that. And what this does is it actually grabs the already preloaded assets in memory, and then you're able just to reference that. Instead of having to reload it every single time, you just access that pre-cached version of the Rive animation. The way that I do it is like this. So I start by creating a subfolder under the libs folder. I'm going to call it helpers, and I'm going to create a file called Rive helper. So I'm going to create a new file called Rive helper.dart. This is nothing more than a class that will hold certain references in there. In this particular case, it's going to have a reference to a Rive file. The Rive file will encapsulate the bytes that have been loaded programmatically, stored in memory, and then I can reuse this and I can reference it somewhere else whenever I need the bytes pertaining to that animation, as opposed to reload it every single time. I'm going to create a static reference of a Rive file. I'm going to make it nullable because initially it will be null. After then I perform the loading, then I store this value in there. So then now what I'm going to do is I'm going to call it main file. You need to import the Rive package, of course, and then you have this reference to a Rive file, which again, like I mentioned, encapsulates and provides access to the object that it contains. Like the file that contains all the animations will be stored in this specific reference called Rive file. We'll be storing this particular reference of type Rive file called main file. The next thing that I would do is actually create a helper method that will perform this loading on my behalf. And the way that we're going to do it, we're going to leverage that landing page. And inside of that landing page is where we're going to do the preloading of those assets and then proceeding to the application once the animation has been loaded successfully. So let's create that. So I'm going to create a static future void. I'm going to make it void for now because it's going to be straightforward. We're going to be able to load that Rive file, cache it in memory, and then notify the application. You're good to go. Please proceed and then load from this cached version of the animation. So I'm going to call it just like that, load Rive. I'm going to decorate my method with async because I'm going to be performing some awaits and I'm going to be performing some asynchronous operations. Remember, when you're reading from a file system, when you're reading from the assets, you may incur into some latency, and that is the reason why I want to do it like that. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to designate the path to where my assets are. In this particular case, I'm just going to say path, and then the assets, you know where they are, is in the assets, animations, and then I'm just going to refer to the file in question, which is hello rive.riv. I have my path ready. Now, the first thing that you need to do before you even try to access a file directly in this particular case, or you want to import files from a location, it could be from the network, it could be from the local file system. So before you even attempt to load this file asynchronously, you must initialize Rive's underlying engine that will give you the capability to cache this file in memory and store it in a Rive file instance. So the way that you initialize the Rive's runtime, you have to say await Rive file dot initialize. And what this does is initialize Rive's text, audio, and layout engines. And then this is, again, if you see it right there, it says that it is automatically called when you try to use rivefile.asset, rivefile.network, or rivefile.file. But only when you're using import, you need to call this manually. But you must call initialize if you're planning on using rivefile.import, which is exactly what we're going to be doing. Then the next thing that you do in question is actually load the bytes from that file in the assets, load it using the root bundle, capture those bytes, and then assign it to your main file reference of type Rive file. And you do it like this: main file equals Rive file dot import. And then right there is where you shove in the bytes that you have captured after you have read the file from the assets folder. You have to say await root bundle You have to import the Flutter services, of course, and then you say .load the path. So what this does is, again, designate the path to where your specific animation is, in this particular case, the assets folder. You say manually Rive file.initialize because you want to initialize the underlying engines, in this particular case, the layout engine, and then you do Rive file.import. You read the bytes asynchronously, you shove it into this file, and then you assign it to this reference called main file. With this in place, you should be good to go now to the next phase, which is how do you invoke this, where specifically you invoke this, and how do you then leverage this pre-cached file in all those other animations, which are still referencing the assets file, which is a little bit not so optimized. So let's do that. So once this is done, now let's do some refactoring in the page called landing page. So right here in the landing page, I'm going to do some refactoring. What you want to do here is probably show like some sort of loading state before the bytes have been pre-cached and loaded into memory. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to refactor this. Instead of having a stack, what I'm going to do is I am going to surround this with a future builder widget. You could do it in any other approach. Let's go with this simple approach of showing a loading indicator, showing some sort of circular progress indicator. Then once the files have been loaded, then we proceed into the application and then display the cached version of that animation. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to move this a little bit lower, but actually the way that I want to do it is I'm going to do body future builder. And then future builder, remember, requires two parameters. So it requires the builder where you pass the context and a snapshot. And of course, the future will be our newly created method off of the Rive helper called Rive helper.load file. Then now all I need to do is just grab my stack out of here. Get rid of this. I don't need that. The way that I will do it right now for simplicity purposes is just check for the snapshot. I'll say if snapshot, and then I check the connection state. I'll say if the connection state equals done, meaning this future has notified me that its loading has completed. In this particular case, the file is fully loaded. I'm going to say connection state.done. Then you return the stack. Like this whole stack, I'm going to return it. Right here. Otherwise, if it's not done yet, let's show a circular progress indicator. So I'm going to return a circular progress indicator with a value color of always stopped animation, colors that blue accent, because I think we've been using this a little bit throughout the application. So I'm going to, just as a safety measure, I'm going to surround my circular progress indicator around a center. Just want to make sure that it's in the center. So check this out. Let's try it one more time. I'm going to reload the whole application. Let's see if this actually at least displays that circular progress indicator right there. So I'm going to reload the whole application, rebuild it one more time. And there it is. You hardly saw the spinner. Let me reload it. You saw the spinner very little for very little time. Why? Because this is a 68 kilobyte file. Let's just do like a tiny synthetic delay into our Rive helper. Like right here, I'm just going to add a wait future.delayed, and let's just do like a 2-second delay or something like that. Let's try that. I'll reload it. You should be able to see now the spinner, the circular progress indicator, and then you proceed into going into the application. How can you ensure that then the cached version is ready to be used by all those other widgets? There's no other way to verify, but actually trying it. So let's try that. I'm going to start with the mascot, which is the main one. Now that I have the pre-cached version of that animation in that Rive file.main file reference, all I need to do is use that special widget called Rive animation.direct instead of the .asset. So I'm going to replace my asset by the Rive animation.direct. Here it is. And then you provide the file in question, the reference that contains a file Rive instance, which is Rive helper.main file. Just like so. And of course, I'm going to use it like this. I'm going to trust that the file has actually been loaded because we've done it at the landing page, and then now we've proceeded further. We're not going to let the user proceed further unless this file has been properly loaded. So let's rebuild and let's see if our character displays correctly. So I'm going to save, reload the whole thing, and then if we actually see the character in there, that means it's using the cached version. There it is. Now, if we go to the next one, it's actually using the cached version because we just replaced it right there. So why don't we go ahead now and replace it for all the other ones? All we need to do is just replace the Rive animation.asset by the Rive animation.direct, referencing that Rive helper.main file because it's the cached version. And now you probably then notice a little bit of performance maybe because we're actually reusing that file as opposed to everybody reloading it over and over. So I'm going to do that, and let's do some of that refactoring. Let's go to the mascot button. We'll do it right here. There it is. All I need to do is just import it. Let's go to the hat. Hat selection doesn't require it, but this one does. So I'm going to just replace it right here. Import. Do the same thing. Mascot header. Do it right here. Save it. There we go. Mascot icon, I think we're also doing it. There it is. Save. Import. Mascot title. It does it as well. Here we go. I don't want to do a find and replace. I just wanted to show you where everything is. But if I could do a whole search for Rive animation.asset just to make sure that if I'm missing anybody, here it is. So this is for the mascot animations, but it's okay. I could do it. I could do it for this one as well. So I'm going to save that. Let's just do, here we go. Perfect. Now let's reload the whole application with everything replaced. All the animations should be tapping into that cached version of the file. So let's reload the whole thing. Now, if everything displays, that means everything is coming from the cached version. And there it is. I can do the selection of the hats. I can do the jump. I can do the wave. I should be able to do the form as well. There it is. If I just type my name and hit save name, everything is coming now from the cached version of the application. So this is the second approach in which you can optimize how you render the graphics, how you load your animations in a more streamlined fashion. Even if you're doing like a small file like that, I would definitely encourage you to do this moving forward because that way it sets you up on a good path for when you're building something small, but then the application is growing. That way you're keeping optimization at the forefront and your application will always deliver the best user experience. No janking, no lagging, no hiccups or anything, and your application will always perform well, even if it's for a small file. The next one is actually about how you then distribute the animations, the way that you create them in Rive, how you import them into Flutter, as opposed to one single gigantic file. How about if you split them into those discrete elements that your application is about? For example, you can have one Rive file for all the buttons. You can have one Rive file for all the characters. You can have one Rive file for miscellaneous animations. So let me show you that approach, and you can optimize the way that you load the animations and you render them in your application accordingly. So let's see that one. So as I was discussing earlier, I'm going to give you a couple of other strategies, a couple of tips and tricks on how you can actually distribute your animations in Rive. You don't have to actually deliver everything on the same file, but in this particular case, because this is a small application, I'm good by having just one file containing all the animations pertaining to the whole application in there. For example, in this particular case, I have my Hello Rive. You see all my animations in there. I have my character, I have my titles, I have all the buttons, and I have all the animations. I have any miscellaneous applications and whatnot. But what if, for example, you're working with multiple teams, you have different people working in separate features of the application. You don't want to affect, for example, the development of one feature of your application doesn't have to depend on something that you're actually working, or if you edit the file mistakenly, you affect somebody else. This also brings some pros and cons. The pros are everything is in one single file. You could work collaboratively on that single file, and you know that everything is in there. There's no way to searching for other things any other place. Everything is centralized in one single file. But the cons are, like I mentioned, you could affect somebody else's work. Doing distributed work might be a little bit affected. Compartmentalizing your animations, distributing your animations based on categories. For example, it'd be great if you could build like your own library of animations where one file, for example, one Rive file contains all your buttons, one Rive file contains all your icons, the other one contains all your characters. I think that would be a good distribution. What if, let's say, we're trying to tackle that approach? Let's say in our particular scenario, let's imagine a larger application. One Rive file that only contains my characters, one Rive file that only contains my buttons, and one that contains any miscellaneous animations. And then that way, it promotes collaboration, distributed creation of these animations. Also, when I load them into my application, I can even do some lazy loading. I can even do some deferred loading of maybe different sections of the application. I don't have to penalize my users by having to load the whole set of animations if some of them are not going to be used. So that is another approach in which you can split your animations into multiple Rive files. Let me show you that example right now. For example, here you see that you have the Hello Rive which is just one file. But what if you had all these in separate files? Let me show you this example. Here, for example, I just created for you one file called Rive Mascot, but this file only contains the mascot assets. Only the things that pertain to that mascot are here in one single file. Then I have another one. If I go back over, I have another one just for the buttons. And here you see just one file only has the buttons. Let's say you have a designer only working on the buttons, working on the style guides of your application, and then you assign this file to them. They would start working on this. That's pretty cool. But then you have another animator, another designer working on the mascot. But then you as a developer, you bring those pieces together with Flutter. And then I have this file that contains just miscellaneous animations. In my particular case, I considered the title to be miscellaneous. This is just to illustrate the example that I'm trying to show you. Now you have 3 files as opposed to one. You have 3 files, one only for the mascot, one only for the Rive buttons, and one for the miscellaneous animations. Now, how do you bring all of this together? How do you import this into your Flutter project, and how then you bring it together, how you leverage the power of caching? How do you load all these files in parallel, but then bring it all together to make it a cohesive animation so that your users are not penalized and your users are actually provided an amazing experience? Let me show you how to do so. The first thing that you need to do is, once you've split the files into multiple files, just export them as normal. So I'm just going to click right here and I'm going to click on export on all of my files. I'm just going to export all my files. That's it. I've already done that for you, so I'm going to move this over to the side. So I have my 3 newly created Rive files. The only caveat is this. Check this out. One single file, the whole hello Rive, was 68 kilobytes. If you split the files like this, look, they are pretty much roughly the same size as the original file with everything together. That's why I mentioned that Rive optimizes the files. In this particular case, this may not be the optimal way to go, but in the case that you really want to do it like this and you have to do it like this, this is the approach that you could take. But you see, each one of these files is roughly the size of the original one, containing all of them together. But bear with me, let's proceed with this so I can show you how you can accomplish something like that. Now with your Rive files exported, one for the buttons, one for the mascot, one for miscellaneous, let's just bring those files into our project. I'm just going to drag them in, and there they are. That's awesome. Just going to get that out of the way. And now, how do you actually leverage the same hooks and the same harness that we created, this whole infrastructure, to actually load these files in an asynchronous fashion and then leverage it within the application? Like I mentioned, caching them in memory, and then only the widgets that actually need to use those would use them appropriately. Let's try that. So I would start by, instead of having just one main file right here, I will actually have references to each of the other files in question. So I'm gonna need one Rive file reference for the mascot file. I'm going to need one for the buttons. So I'm going to call it buttons file. And last but not least, I'm going to need one for the miscellaneous. So I'm going to call misc file, just like that. Perfect. So let's try to keep it simple. Let's not go too fancy. So now let's proceed. Let's keep things simple. I'm going to leave that method exactly the way it is. And I'm going to be creating another one for loading all of these files. I'm going to start the same way. I'm going to call it static future void. But instead of calling it load Rive, I'm going to call it load Rive files. So load Rive files, same way. I need to do it asynchronously because I'm going to do an asynchronous operation right in here. I need a path for the mascot, which is pretty much the same thing. Remember, we need to do the same thing, but the file is called rivemascot.riv. I need one for the buttons, so buttons path. I'm going to have exactly the same way, RIV file. And last but not least, I need one for the miscellaneous, so misc path. And this is for the Rive miscellaneous animations. I will eventually do the same thing I'm doing right here. I need to initialize the underlying Rive engine, of course, if I need to load these files from the assets, capture the bytes, and then cache it somewhere. But in this particular case, I have 3 files, not just one. How do I optimize this in such a way that I can load all these files in parallel using some of the existing constructs in Flutter to load these in parallel, capture their bytes, and then import it accordingly, caching those files in memory and then using it later on? I'm going to use an approach in which you can wait for multiple asynchronous operations in parallel called future.wait. So I'm going to do that right here. I'm going to say final bundles. I need all the bundles, of course, from every single file. Each one of those files, I'm going to capture the bytes. I'm going to load them all in parallel. I'm going to wait for the 3 of them to load And then after that is when I'm going to proceed. So I'm going to use this construct called future.wait. So I need to do await future.wait. And then the future.wait, what it does is it takes an array of asynchronous operations or futures in this particular case. I'm going to load those asynchronously. I'm going to receive them in the same order in which I add them. And then after that, I'm going to grab the corresponding bytes, shove it into different Rive files using the Rive file.import, and then just correspondingly add it to the references that I just created above. So what am I going to do? I'm going to need here to use the root bundle to load each one in turn. So I'm going to use root bundle dot load, and then I'm gonna do, for example, first the mascot. Then I need the other two. I need the one for the buttons, and then I need the miscellaneous animations. After these have loaded, depending on how long they all take, I'm gonna wait for all of them to load. And what I'm gonna get as a result is an array of byte data. The byte data corresponding to each one of those files after they have been read into memory. Now I'm just gonna grab those bytes, shove it into each individual Rive file, and then use it later on. So now that I have my files, I'm gonna assume that they have been loaded correctly. So I'm going to do this. Await Rive file.initialize. Remember, you must do this before you do any imports of bytes into your Rive file. Now you're ready to proceed to the next step, which is actually reading the bytes, assigning those bytes to the corresponding Rive file. So now the first one, of course, is the mascot. So let's do mascot file. And then all I need to say is Rive file.import bundles first one. Why? Because I know that the first one corresponds to the mascot. So I've loaded the mascot, is in index 0. Then I need to do the other indexes, index 1 and index 2, corresponding to both the buttons file and third, the miscellaneous animations, which is this one. With that in there, I should be good to even go back into the landing page, replace the asynchronous loading that I'm doing there by listening it inside of a future builder widget, proceed into my application, and instead of reusing the main file, you'll see how it actually will blow up because we're not going to be using the main file anymore. When we call this, we're not calling the main file. We're going to be actually distributing the animations across 3 different files. So I'm going to save that. Let's come back to the landing page. Instead of doing load Rive, what I'm going to do is load Rive files, which means load the 3 files separately, but in parallel, once you have their information, cache them, and now you can use them throughout the application. Now check this out. If you rebuild, things should be blowing up. There it is. Why? Because the main file wasn't loaded. The application is still referring to the main file. What we're going to do is we're going to stop, we're going to kill the application, and we're going to start it again in just a minute. But first, let's replace the references that those widgets are actually pointing to in the corresponding fashion. For example, if I go to the mascot animation, if I go to the mascot widget, this is actually not on the main file anymore. This is actually referring to the mascot file. If I go to the mascot title, that was actually in the miscellaneous. So I go to the miscellaneous file. Now this one, let's go to the icon. The icon is actually the button. So I'm going to do buttons file for this. The header is actually in the mascot file. The mascot hat is actually also in the mascot file. Mascot hat selection doesn't apply. Let's go to the button. We have our own unique cached file called buttons file. Let's use that. Let's just keep this all together. I'm going to save. And let's see now if preloading 3 files independently, loading them in parallel, and then each widget just reference the corresponding pre-cached version of the file works well. So let's try that. I'm going to do Flutter run. Let's just run the application one more time with all of those pre-cached assets there. The buttons, the character, the miscellaneous ones. We've already loaded the 3 of them using future.wait, in which it happens in parallel. Then once we have our bytes in memory, then we distribute each corresponding byte to the corresponding Rive file instance. We refer to those Rive file instances in each corresponding widget. And then now let's see how it works. So let's try that. It's gonna relaunch. And now you should see it launch from the beginning. If you see everything in there, that means everything has been loaded in memory appropriately. Every corresponding widget is pulling the corresponding cached version for it. And let's see. So if I even do this, this is all good. This is still loaded from memory, the corresponding cached version. The buttons are actually from its corresponding Rive cached version. And even the form as well has the corresponding buttons and animations as well. And all of that is actually being reused and being optimized. This is the approach that you should take moving forward. This is a way for you to provide a very seamless and smooth experience. You do the preloading up front, and then the rest of your application should perform really well because everything has been pre-cached. You don't have to be reloading all of that. And at least you don't penalize your users. You provide a great experience. You provide a very smooth experience. I love using it like this. So I would encourage you moving forward, instead of doing the widgets like that, loading them all the time from the assets or from the network, you should pre-cache it once, and then you can just reuse that animation over and over with very minimal overhead. And you saw that the efforts were very minimal. So thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed this video. So this was very crucial to complete this series of videos with this specific topic, how you optimize your Rive animations within Flutter. Thank you so much for your support. To all of you who reached this far, kudos to you. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope we made you a little bit more comfortable in Rive, that you learned a thing or two about creating animations, getting familiar with the Rive editor, bring those creations into Flutter. And now you can embark on an amazing journey in which you can bring amazing quality, top-notch experience, super cool animations to your Flutter applications and make them stand from the competition. Thank you so much again. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, and just give me any feedback. I hope you enjoyed this series. Thank you so much for your support. See you on the next video. And just like that, we've reached the end of our animation adventure. Thank you for joining us on this amazing journey through the world of animations with Rive and Flutter. As we reach the end of our animation journey, it's time to take a moment and reflect on the things that we shared on animations with Rive and Flutter. Remember those first steps, bringing those animations to life in the Rive editor, then the excitement of creating and importing custom assets, and creating complex animations using artboards and nested artboards. We also delved into the magic of inputs and listeners, making our animations truly interactive and responsive. And who can forget the thrill of seamlessly integrating those stunning animations into our Flutter projects, controlling them with code and witnessing the fusion between design and development. We also explored state machines, dynamic text, and even performance optimization, ensuring our animations not only looked stunning, but ran flawlessly. Now, with the knowledge and inspiration gained from this series, you're now ready to embark on your own creative adventure. Thank you so much for being part of this amazing community. Now go ahead, animate, and share your creative vision and unique animated masterpieces with the whole world. I can't wait to see what you create. And with that, thank you so much for watching this series on animations with Rive and Flutter. See you next time. Hey everyone, I'm Roman. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please make sure to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on other Flutter content coming my way. Thank you so much for your support. Also, don't forget to follow me on social media.